We've been talking for days now all around the country about now we're over 100 days, but the anniversary, we always like these anniversaries of 100 plus days now that the president has been in his office. What does this mean for Massachusetts with all these cuts that we are hearing about from the federal government?
Yeah, well, you want to start there.
Sorry.
There's so much good stuff that's actually going on that I hope we do talk about. But look, this is this important thing to talk about. I think that so far the Trump administration has been a total failure when it comes to the economy, and I think that's the central issue that a lot of people are focused on, and I think was the issue in the race in many, and unfortunately it's just been a total failure, from the tariffs, which are wreaking havoc with businesses, small, medium, and large in Massachusetts and around the country, to the cuts to so many things, NIH cuts, which obviously do great harm to Massachusetts institutions, our hospitals, our life sciences ecosystem, the cuts to colleges and universities. We've seen a lot of cuts, hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts when it comes to funding for housing, transportation, infrastructure, money that's there to actually, help us build more resilient communities, and it's just been really devastating, and I think it looks like there's more to come from all that we hear. So, that's been bad. I think what's also been really bad is the way that President Trump and the administration have sought to weaponize the Department of Justice, weaponize the IRS, do everything to silence critics and those that don't agree with them, the silencing of law firms, of companies, of universities, and of everyday Americans. And that's deeply, deeply troubling, and not the course that we need to be on as a country.
We're going to get to some good news in a second, so we promise you.
No, but that's it's a very challenging time, and I think it's a challenging time for a lot of states, because you have to navigate, first off, what's happening with your economy in the state, the impact that inflation is having, and his efforts are having. Because right now, what's happening is we don't see capital deployed in this country. It's here and there, but a lot of it's going overseas. People are going elsewhere. Students are going elsewhere. Companies are going elsewhere. Developers are going elsewhere because of the uncertainty in the market right now, and that has a real ripple effect on all of our economies. So that's a challenge as we navigate in this moment. There's a heightened fear and anxiety on the part of so many, and we're trying to manage things here in the state. But fundamentally, I haven't seen anything that I can point to that has been a net positive for Massachusetts or any other state from this administration. The economy is dominating everything, and every day he just continues to do things that seem more adverse to lowering the cost of living and making life easier for Americans across the board.
Nancy Gertner, the retired federal judge, wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago saying that she thinks that certain states are getting picked on, like blue states like Massachusetts, that has not been terribly supportive of President Trump, as opposed to like maybe Oklahoma. You think that's true?
I think that all states are getting hurt. Look at NIH.
Yeah.
Look at Alabama. Look at Texas. They're major recipients of NIH funding. Ohio. And, we're also seeing attacks on colleges and universities across the board, cuts to the VA system. Remember, I think that was one of the first things out of the gate when they fired a bunch of doctors and nurses at VAs. That happened across the country. I will say, though, that we definitely experience it here in Massachusetts. We have some of the very best colleges and universities in the world. We have institutions here who are doing research on life-saving cures and treatments. The number of Nobel Prize winners who come out of Massachusetts is just, unbelievable. The number of people who come to Massachusetts, including from other countries, to study, to do research, to start companies, to incubate new companies, to grow economies is unbelievable. People understand there are about 90,000 foreign students who come to Massachusetts every year.
Wow.
And that's because of who we are. We are the global hub for education. We're number one, by the way, in states for education, healthcare, and innovation. And we need to continue to maintain that ranking. But when you've got a president who is taking away funding, research funding, which means that studies are being shut down, that's devastating. And you also have that compounded by the fact that this immigration effort is scaring away a lot of foreigners right now and scaring away the revocation of student visas, the last few weeks. What's happening is China's on our campuses here in Massachusetts, recruiting our faculty, recruiting our postdocs, recruiting those researchers who are today, or were, studying cures for cancer, ALS, Parkinson's, who are pioneering the technologies that we need for our defense systems. And saying, come to China, and we'll give you a lab, and we'll give you 90 people, and continue the research there. That makes Massachusetts. That doesn't help Massachusetts. It certainly doesn't help America, and it doesn't put America first. It makes us less competitive. So that's the reality of what we're trying to deal with. And as governor, I am trying to stand strong and say that Massachusetts, is a place to come and study, is a place to continue to do research, is a place where, we want innovation. And I'm going to do everything I can to support that and to support our communities and take care of people as best we can in our state. And I think that our state is, strong and resilient. We are well situated. Again, we're number one in education, innovation, and healthcare. We were just ranked the number one state in the country for the safest drinking water. We're also the safest state in the country. Safest state. We have the lowest gun deaths. We have the lowest vehicular traffic deaths. We have the third lowest property thefts in the country. And on Mother's Day weekend, I want to say that we were just ranked the best place not only to live if you're a woman, but the best place for working moms. So we got a lot going for us as this state, and it's a time where I see a lot of people pulling together, and we need to work together across the board. Business, academe, government, local communities, and focus on really delivering for people here and fighting back against efforts to take us backwards.
Governor Healey, you mentioned people from other nations. Trump has spoken out quite regularly against some people who we consider to be deserving to get refugee status, whether it's people in Afghanistan who fought along with our troops. In the last day or so, the government has officially granted 54 Afrikaans South Africans, white descendants of Dutch colonizers, refugee status. We know about the DEI stuff. We know that Toni Morrison's book is out of the Naval Academy. The Bell Curve and Mein Kampf are still in. Is Trump a racist?
Well,
in your mind?
I think that Donald Trump has done things that have only exacerbated racial disparities, have created more problems there that are not in furtherance of equal treatment under the law, that do not promote equality. And, I continue to say that diversity is a strength and not a flaw in this country, and it makes no sense whatsoever to exclude women and people of color and gay people from the table. It hasn't worked. It doesn't work. It hasn't made our military stronger to do that. It doesn't make our boardrooms or C-suites stronger to exclude people and talent. It doesn't make government stronger to exclude people. And, that's why I encourage people to continue with the programming that they have to assure that people, that we're getting the benefit of all perspectives. And by the way, perspectives, experiences, I'm not just breaking it down on racial or ethnic lines. I'm talking about like geographies too. I know in our administration, we work really hard to have viewpoints in from all over the state. What are our rural communities going to think? What are our hill towns going to think? What are our gateway city folks going to think? And that's important. So, I just think we have a different philosophy about that.
Are you avoiding calling him a racist, or you just don't think he is?
I don't think my job is to name call, Jim. I don't think it's productive right now. My job is to deliver for people in the state, which I'm working hard to do on housing, on transportation, and continuing with the programs. At a time when the President of the United States is dismantling the VA system as we know it, I was really proud to stand the other day over at Brighton Marine, where that's a wonderful organization that provides services for veterans, health care. They just got a $10 million investment to work with us and others on ending veteran homelessness. That's where I'm at. We got to keep moving forward as a state. We got to continue to support our life sciences. We've got to continue to support our sectors of technology here. I just had a great conference the other day with IBM for the second year in a row, IBM, multinational company, has decided that Massachusetts is the place to hold its worldwide conference every year to talk about what they are doing and bring technologists together. And it's part of who we are. Next week, I'm going to stand with folks just down the street at Lego. Lego's, international headquarters coming here. The other day, I had an Israeli company that's Sheba Arc. It's an incubation innovator, and they are coming to Massachusetts to do really important work. I think all these things are important to remember in the context of what is going on right now.
Well, we'd ask people not be disruptive. If you have a question for the governor, we are happy to entertain. One last thing before we get to the calls and texts, if we can, Governor. You have also convened, or in the midst of convening, Canadian premiers, obviously in response to this tariff nightmare that is affecting virtually everybody in this country. What's that all about, and what's the goal there?
Well, do you know that 1 in 5 New Englanders are Canadian Americans or of Canadian descent?
I did not know that.
Well, I think about this, a lot of us are Irish, but a lot of the Irish came through Canada first. My grandfather's family actually, Newfoundland, and that's a true statistic. And it's also the case that Canada is the #1 trading partner for all of the New England states, for New York, I think for maybe 34 states. So obviously, the economic ties are super strong. 90% of the jet fuel at Logan comes from Canada. 8 out of 10 cars in Greater Boston are powered by Canadian crude. And it's just to say, we've got so many economic ties that are there, and we've got cultural ties, and we've got familial ties. So, when the President of the United States is picking on Canada and calling them the 51st state and imposing these crazy tariffs, I thought it was very important that we show leadership, and we show that there's solidarity among a number of our states, that we want to continue to support our allies and friends to the north. And so I invited the governors of New England and the governor of New York to meet here in Boston with the Canadian premiers, the governors there, and let's talk about things we can do. Maybe there's an MOU we can sign around trade. Maybe there are things that we can do to continue that relationship. And that just that was a reason that I did that, Jim.
Kelly Ayotte from New Hampshire is not one of the inviters. She's also spending most of her time criticizing Massachusetts or you. Was she invited and refused to participate?
Oh no, she's invited, and I hope the governor comes. I expect she will. We meet regularly as New England states, and I think it's just important. I think it's really important that we continue to do this. I've been spending time meeting with other countries, folks from other countries, for the express purpose of making sure that Massachusetts is open for business. I'm sending my team next week to something that is called Select USA. It's where countries from all over the world come, and the states basically get to show off who they are and why it is that your state is a great place to do business. And I'm sending my team down there. We're going to brag a whole lot about the great things that we've got going on in Massachusetts, because I want people coming here. I want economic growth. I want more jobs, right? And that's part of what I do as governor. And so meeting with the Canadians is an extension of that, and an important one. And in talking to the Canadian governors, we reached out. They were really super excited to come and do that, and appreciate it.
Okay, we're going to take some calls. This is Ask the Governor with Governor Maura Healey. I'm sure you recognize her voice. Mary from Wareham, thank you for calling.
Hi, Mary.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for making yourself available to take our call. And why I'm calling is because I get fuel assistance, and those added gas bills would have been covered under my fuel assistance. But because it's deferred to summer, fuel assistance won't pay that. That ends the end of April. I've called fuel assistance, and they said there's no plan to deal with it. And I'm wondering if you have a plan to deal with that, because this will hurt the lowest income constituents in the Commonwealth.
Did you make out the question?
A little bit, but not.
I
I think it was
believe
about fuel assistance.
continuing into the summer. Is that what you were saying, Mary?
There's an echo. May I repeat it?
Yeah, do it. This is much better. Say it again quickly if you can.
Okay. Because those extra payments were deferred for summer, fuel assistance won't cover that. It ends the end of April.
Okay.
So the lowest wage people are going to have to cover those ourselves I still had fuel assistance left that would have covered it, but they stopped paying the bills at the end of April.
Okay,
This
we
is
got
some
it.
of the
And
deferred charges
Yeah.
from the utility companies, I think. Yeah, we got it.
Assistance.
Yep.
We understand it, Mary.
Mary.
Let's hear what the governor
Mary,
has to say.
thank you so
for the
much
call.
for calling. You know, I was outraged when I saw what had happened to people's bills over the winter, and we took immediate action. We worked immediately with the utilities to get to a plan to lower costs, to spread things out over time. Everybody got a $50 rebate back on their bill last month. I'm filing legislation this week that's going to deal with the very issue that Mary's talking about, which is the high cost of energy. And in that legislation, there are going to be actual tools that we think we can implement if the legislature passes it that will have the effect of lowering energy costs for people like Mary, for our businesses, and for residents around the state. And on that, I want you to know, Mary, even the Trump administration cut funding. It's another example of something bad they did. They cut funding for a program that provides heating assistance payments to lower income folks and to seniors and just lower income folks generally. And, we're trying to find ways to help people with that funding going away. So, we are very much focused on this issue, Mary, and I'm glad that you raised it.
Mary, thanks.
Governor,
Because it's also, we don't want things to just be spread out. We want things to actually be reduced. And that's some of what has happened with the measures I've already taken. The measures I've already taken, we estimate, are going to result in $6 billion in savings over the next 5 years. Add to that the legislation that we file this week, and we'll be in a lot better position for people like Mary and everyone else.
You going to read Martha? Is that what you're going to do
I was
next?
going to read Martha because
Good.
we've gotten a lot of
Yeah.
texts about this. This ICE raid in Worcester that took place yesterday. ICE agents, some of them masked, some of them not, swooped down upon this woman, took her away. And then there was a 16-year-old girl, her daughter, who was very distraught, holding a baby. And not clear if she's the mother of the baby or it's her sister, I don't know. But the people at the scene said there was no warrant. At least 20 cops showed up, and they arrested the 16-year-old daughter, who held her to the ground, who was protesting her mother's leaving. And people were upset by the chaos, by the screaming, by the fact that this woman was the one that was arrested, was put into an unmarked SUV, and they claimed there was no warrant. So the questions basically are...
Why don't you read
what do you-
Martha? She nails it, I think.
she called the atrocity in Worcester yesterday. Why aren't we fighting back to get these kidnappers out of the state? And an earlier texter wanted to know what are you going to do about the lack of due process when these people are being hauled off by ICE.
Yeah. I think we all need to learn more about what actually happened yesterday in Worcester. I saw some of the images and the video, and it's disturbing, understandably. That said, I'll tell you this. You can't rush to judgment about what's going on. I have said from the outset as governor, okay, and I was also your attorney general and a prosecutor, law enforcement can, must, and should work together to investigate and apprehend those who are committing criminal activities. And, that's always been my position. I've also been clear that we are not a sanctuary state. I've also been clear that, some of what I've seen when I look at the actions of ICE around the country is really disturbing and problematic, and we see it play out in court right now. I think there's a hearing in the Vermont case, right? Or the Tufts student, where there's been a lack of due process, okay? And when there's a lack of due process, that is fundamentally wrong and needs to be made right and needs to be addressed. I don't like to comment on, and I would encourage people to, until we know all of what happened, people can jump to conclusions, And I know what we do know in that situation is that there was some effort by ICE to pick someone up. The circumstances, I don't know. I don't know if it was with a warrant or without a warrant. We don't know. Police, there was a big crowd there, and eventually Worcester PD was called to it to help address what was going on. And some in the crowd, moved on law enforcement. You cannot move on police. You can't attack police. I don't know the circumstances of why this young woman was taken in or what efforts were made, there, what was being done. But, those are so even though I can't really address what happened specifically there yesterday, That's just sort of how I see this.
So
this whole big
what are the
picture.
general instructions, forget Worcester for a second, to local police departments in terms of cooperating, and I use the term broadly, with ICE?
Well, the law's clear here in Massachusetts that law enforcement, police are not allowed to work with ICE when it comes to apprehending and detaining people for immigration enforcement purposes. Law enforcement is allowed to and should continue to work with local, state, federal partners when it comes to basic law enforcement around investigating and holding people accountable for crimes. Those are two different things. And what I understand about yesterday is that Worcester PD was not assisting ICE with their carrying out of whatever ICE was doing with that woman. Rather, Worcester PD was called to the scene in response because there was a big crowd, and then things went from there. But it wasn't it didn't have anything to do with what ICE was doing.
As the lead spokesperson for our state, we've asked other people this, but your answer probably matters the most. If an international student said, I'm considering coming to the United States to go to school, or I'm thinking of going to somewhere to school in Western Europe, based upon what Trump has done the last couple of months, what would your advice to that student be?
Come to Massachusetts. This is a great country. And, I stood with thousands a couple weeks ago on a green in Lexington and by a bridge in Concord and behind Old North Church in the North End to talk about the birth of America, right? It all started here, It was here that farmers and tradesmen and brave folks stood up to a mighty king and mighty army, and we know how that ended. And I just think that, especially now, it's good to remind people who we are in Massachusetts and what we stand for.
But you can't guarantee her safety, can you, Governor?
Who?
That student who's asking you that question. Can you guarantee that she'll be safe here?
Well, I can guarantee that there's no state where students who want to study, want to research, want to start companies, want to raise families, want to grow businesses are going to be better protected and supported than in Massachusetts. That's why in our economic development bill, we had a lot of money for people who are coming out of our colleges and universities looking to start companies and continue with the research. It's why we fund education in this state. It's why, we're working hard every day to continue funding that supports our littlest learners all the way through. Look, we've made community college free. We've lowered the cost for attending state and state colleges and universities, Jim. This is a great place to be, and I think that's why students come by the hundreds and hundreds of thousands every year to Massachusetts, both to our incredible public institutions as well as our privates to study. And I think that's why you see so many foreign students drawn here as well. I mean, the number of people I meet who come from all over the world that spent time in Massachusetts in school doing research, it's really amazing. And I think that holds true. And can I protect? Look, I can't stop the rain. The rain has stopped.
The rain stopped.
There's a lot of things.
Nice job.
There's a lot of. I know the
That was
boundaries.
Kelly Ayotte who stopped the rain. by
Thank
the way.
you, Governor. I'll do everything within my power. And what can I do in my power? I can make sure that we're investing. Investing in education and investing in life science and investing in our, in all of our people. So, but can I stop the Trump administration from doing things that are harmful? Well, who's doing a good job of stopping that is A.G. Campbell. When he's doing things and the administration's doing things that violate the law, he's been taken to court already, and you see the results. The courts have been, and the AGs have had something to say about that.
We have Evan at the Boston Public Library talking about a subject we talked about earlier this week, the Hemskin Field with the private jet expansion. Here he is. Hi, Evan.
Hello, Evan.
Thank you so much. My name is Evan Mackay. I'm from the executive committee of the Sierra Club. In addition to the private jet expansion at Hanscom, I'm interested in our state budget. So we know that our budget is a really difficult trade-off of priorities: healthcare, housing, education, affordability for low-income families. Right now, within our state budget, we have a special tax loophole that means that every single time a billionaire buys a private jet, they don't have to pay Massachusetts state sales tax. Everyday people pay sales tax on normal things all the time, but there's this tax loophole and it costs our state more than $25 million every single year. We're trying to ground this jet tax loophole. Governor, will you help us ground this jet tax loophole?
Thank you, Evan. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Evan. I don't know what you're referring to exactly, Evan, but that's okay. I'll just say as a general matter that we're going to continue to make investments in things that are priorities. And one of the things that I made as a priority as the first governor in the country to appoint a cabinet level climate chief is that we're going to continue to look to invest 1% of our state budget in energy and environmental affairs. And that's what I did most recently in the budget that I filed. It's now with the legislature, of course. But, you know, it's very important that we continue to make these investments. And I'm open to looking at anything that comes to my desk. And news on Hanscom, by the way, I don't know if you followed that. There's a lot of concern about expansion there. The game's kind of changed, though, on that entirely. Now we have this company, Merlin, that wants to come to Massachusetts and use some of that space to pilot some new technologies there. And so that's kind of changing and resulting in a whole new start to that Hanscom discussion and debate. And I think it's really exciting, actually, to have another example of Massachusetts. Like this is an innovative technology company that's looking for ways to help decarbonize in the transportation sector, and has picked Hanscom, actually, as a place where it wants to work on that.
Well,
So
Governor, I know you're
kind of a game changer there.
I know you're finishing up the environmental study, the MIPA
And thank
thing,
you, by the way,
whatever
for
it
the
is.
work you do for Sierra Club.
MIPA hasn't come in yet. I don't think that it hasn't come in yet finally. But we had, as I mentioned before, we had Chuck Collins in here earlier this week. He's one of the people that's upset about Hanscom. And he points out that about half the jets there are not really used for business. They're going to Martha's Vineyard. They're going to Nantucket. They're going to, nice places to go visit. He's very upset about the expansion. And
As are demonstrators outside who
Yeah.
are always here, yeah.
And is very doubtful about this so-called environmentally correct fuel. I don't know if that's what you're talking about with this Merlin company, if that's something different.
Well, they're an aviation company that's finding ways to do autonomous aviation and have it be decarbonized. So
Yeah.
but we'll see. Look, that's in the early stages now, but it's definitely changed, I think, the discussion on Hanscom.
But you don't
still
have a public
yeah.
position on this, correct?
That project was before my agency, but now with the change that's come forward, there's going to have to be a restart to that. So I'm not going to comment.
You had a question about
Oh, I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
you're doing this thing, this age-friendly agenda deal. Could you translate it for us? What does that mean?
Yeah. Yesterday, I signed an executive order to make Massachusetts the most age-friendly state in the country. I already bragged about how Massachusetts was ranked the best place to have a baby and start a family. I also want Massachusetts to be the best place in the country to grow old. So how do we get there? How do we get there? So we get there by making sure that across all of our agencies, that we are doing things that help us as we get older. And that can be around the kinds of ways we build out, sidewalks and infrastructure so that it's a little more age-friendly, right? What we do across the delivery of healthcare, as people get older. How we look to lower costs. One of the big parts of the big housing bill that I filed and signed was bringing on accessory dwelling units, building out spaces for in-law apartments.
Granny
Look at
Nice.
Marjorie smiling, by the
but
way.
there's just
That's my
so much.
future right there.
So the idea was, I'm going to sign this executive order. We're going to make Massachusetts the most age-friendly place in the country to live and to retire to. And we're going to do that by making sure that all of our agencies are laser focused on this and thinking about with, budgeting and with investments and decisions made that we're taking account. And we actually have this, we call it reimagining Massachusetts. There's a vision there that we put together based on listening sessions that my team held. By the way, I renamed what used to be called the Executive Office of Elder Affairs. There were a lot of jokes about that, to the Executive Office of Aging and Independence, right? Aging and Independence. And that's what this is about. And the secretary there, Secretary Lipson, conducted a series of listening sessions all around the state, 10 or a dozen, where there's actual input from people about what we could do to make Massachusetts more age-friendly. And that's all together in that plan that's available online. And I'm super excited about making this great. We're also, launching this effort around dementia. We know a lot of people are dealing with dementia.
Yes.
It seems to be
Yes.
more prevalent. Maybe it's just picked up on more. I don't know. But we want Massachusetts leading when it comes to dementia detection and also, what we need to do to help people and help families with that.
We just got a text while you were talking about this age-friendly thing about a program that the texter says you're capping, this enhanced community options program that keeps people out of nursing homes. And you can comment on that if you choose, obviously. But it seems to me you're in a pretty impossible spot because we know how difficult budget making is in normal times, particularly your position. You've cut taxes. You don't believe taxes should be raised, at least now from what I understand. How do you factor in, and how do you, whether it's this program you capped or anything else, how do you factor in federal cuts that are happening, like the FEMA cuts, for example, that are affecting a lot of cities and towns, as compared to ones you're quite sure are going to happen, like, for example, the Alston, whatever it is, over there by the turn. How do you do a budget in that sort of unclear world?
Yeah, it's a challenge. It is a challenge, and I'm glad you mentioned that I cut taxes, because I did. I remind people I cut taxes, first time in 20 years. One of the groups that benefited actually were people who were aging, because we've doubled the senior circuit breaker, and that's,
It's a property tax relief provision.
Which is a big deal. It means, up an extra $1,000 or more in your pocket back this year. So, but look, this is the job. It's the job of of any leader, of any CEO, of any governor, right? In this moment, you've got a contingency plan. You've got to try to, anticipate what might be coming, and you've got to just enlist the support of your teams in doing that. So we filed a budget that was within what we thought revenues would be, and that was fiscally responsible back in January. The world changes, though. We've seen it in just the last 100-something days. So, we just need to be nimble and be prepared. I've asked my teams, though, that this is the time to really look hard to make sure that we're maximizing every single taxpayer dollar that we're spending there, because the people deserve it, and people are struggling. And, I just got to make sure that we're getting the very best out of government. I'm lucky to serve and work alongside so many dedicated people who bring it every day. And everybody's just got to really step up to what is a challenge, because, again, it's not only that the Trump administration is making these cuts, and Republicans in Congress are making these cuts and are going to make these cuts to pay for the tax cut. It's also that the conditions have changed in the economy because of so much of what Donald Trump has done around tariffs, right? Around, other things that have just contributed to more inflation. And, that just makes it harder in terms of revenues. I talk to, when I'm out and about, I'm always asking people, well, how's your business? What are you seeing? And, the other night I was out at a restaurant, and it's like discretionary income is down, and people just are not spending as much. And that has an effect. That has a real effect. And so you got to account for all of that, Jim.
We know you have your policy differences. Obviously, you've enunciated them well and relentlessly. We know you don't want to call names, but you just mentioned tariffs, and it's something I knew nothing about and tried to learn as much as I could. And my conclusion, which doesn't really matter, is he has no idea what he's doing. Do you think on most issues that trouble you that Donald Trump is out of his league, that really... I'm not trying to excuse anything, but he really has no idea how to be president of the United States?
What I do know is that a lot of these things seem really indiscriminate. They seem really wrong-headed. There's a lot of start and stop and reversing a direction. And, God, if I ran a government, imagine running a business like that, right? What would your investors say? So that's what I see. I certainly have had the experience where, because we've gone to court. And again, I want to thank A.G. Campbell, who's doing a terrific job with her team in litigating this, because we've had cuts made that just don't make any sense, and then AGs and states will go to court to say, wait, you can't do this, and the courts have ruled in our favor. But why would you take away disaster relief? Why would you, at a time when all states, there's no such thing, red state, blue state. I hate talking about red states and blue states. I hate using those words. States out there around the country are dealing with wildfires and floods and major disasters exacerbated what we're seeing by climate, and he's going to take away disaster relief? You know, it doesn't make sense. What sense does it make to take away, funding for veteran services or funding that goes to support ongoing, research? It just doesn't. And that's what I'm seeing. The tariffs, look, I think that we know the tariffs wasn't written by a chat GPT. It was, that's how those poor penguins were going to get hammered with
That's
those
right.
That's on that island.
tariffs.
That's right. Okay.
They're tariffing the penguins.
But, all kidding aside on this, because, we can have a debate and a discussion about unfair trade balances, right? And then people can talk about this. But the way this was done, it's like everything else. It was such a hammer and not the kind of thoughtful scalpel approach that we need. And that's across the board. Look at Doge, right? How many times they had to reverse? They fired a bunch of people only to have to try to bring them back. And, that's my observation. And the other thing I'll say on tariffs, it's interesting. I was standing in Littleton because we are like go on housing. We need housing. We need to build more housing. Housing is good. It brings vibrancy. It brings opportunity. It grows our economy. And, in Massachusetts, where there is so much that is so great, we don't want people to be priced out. And right now, there are too many people who can't afford rent, who can't afford a down payment, who can't even afford to downsize. And that is a real issue for us in the state, which is why, I'm really asking for everybody's support in building housing. The other day, I got to stand in Littleton, where we had a groundbreaking on a wonderful development of 1,100 homes. It's going to be a wonderful property and site there. And I'm thinking to myself, my Secretary of Housing did, I think, 4 ribbon cuttings this week on housing. Okay, so we're trying to go. But you know what you need for housing? Lumber. Where do we get it from? Canada.
Yeah.
You know what you need for housing? Gypsum and all sorts of other building materials. Where do you get those? Mexico. So at the same time, I'm trying to do things to lower costs by building more housing or cutting taxes. Donald Trump is imposing higher costs, through the tax that is a tariff, and by making housing more expensive to build. And that's the frustrating situation that we find ourselves in.
Let's go to Patrick on a car. You're on with the governor of the Commonwealth. Hey.
All right, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm calling more for the people who can't represent for themselves. I just pulled into the kitchen.
Oh,
We have another Patrick.
I
This is
can't hear
horrible.
you.
He's been on for 40
Yeah,
minutes.
is
So
there
sorry.
a place you can go to with better reception?
Can we do this? Can one of our producers put this on hold, take the call, and see if you can understand what it is? Type it up for us. We'll read it. But we're having phone troubles apparently. I'm sorry,
meanwhile,
Patrick.
we have a lot of texts from people that are talking about being unable to live here. One person says, "I'm 30 years old, work a great job, make 80 grand a year. I can't afford to live here for the rest of my life. Never be able to afford a home." Jan and Mary Mac, what do I tell my 26-year-old twins, both college graduates, good jobs, actuary, urban planner. They're both made up their minds to move someplace else. Housing, taxes, childcare, a mass exodus of young people, and it is a real problem if you're 30 years old, even if you got a lot of money saved. When houses are $1 million,
Yeah, which is why we're trying to bring housing online as quickly as possible. That's why I stood with Sal Lipoli, who's built great housing developments around the state the other day, because this is what we need to do. We now have 129 communities who signed on to the MBTA Communities Act. There was more votes this week, towns supporting housing, embracing housing. And, it's why I worked hard to file and sign that housing bond bill so that we can get money out to developers. I'll tell you, in 18 months alone, there's a program. We give tax credits to developers to build more housing in gateway cities, okay? Because I increased the funding there for that, they've seen a 600% increase in those housing developments in just 18 months. So if you put intentionality into it, we went through a whole process around how do we make building housing easier when it comes to some of the regulatory aspects of this, and you marry that with some money. And by the way, it's not just state money. State money can't do this alone. It's how do you incent private money? And that's what I think is special about what we're trying to do right now, is using that opportunity to bring public-private partnerships together to get more housing built. Every day, Marjorie, this is what I think about. Every day, when I talk to folks, I was up in Newburyport at a shop there talking to a small business owner, and God bless our small business owners. It was Small Business Week just last week, and they are like the heart and soul of our community and really of so much of the economy. But she's telling me about her kids living at home right now still because they can't find that place. So like I am driven every day, and I'm just sort of like, hold on, folks. Hope is coming. Relief is coming. We're doing everything we can to lower costs. And by the way, if Massachusetts, there's so many good reasons to be here, and know that is, what we're working on every day. I have a thermometer. I measure it, okay? I'm the first governor to actually say, oh, how much housing do we need to build? Turns out, a lot, 220,000 units. I don't know why we weren't building housing here for so long. But the good news is, like, every day we're working on that and working to bring more housing online, and it's why I've made such a huge investment in it.
Patrick is back on the car. I think he's talking about the possible closing of Pappas
No,
Rehab.
just read the question. Hannah.
Yeah, he's worried about Pappas Rehab Hospital in Canton closing. He's there picking up his daughter for the weekend. He wants to know if there's an update for family and patients about the impending closure.
Yeah, Patrick, good afternoon, and thank you for the call. The caregivers, the work that's done at Pappas is really remarkable. I've been there. I've spent time on the campus, and so has my team. And right now, there's a working group that I asked to be put together to look at this. The problem with Pappas is not the care or the caregivers. The problem is that nobody invested in this facility for decades. And so it's gotten to the point where we're actually not allowed to bring new patients in because the conditions are so bad. And so it's a tough situation there. And I wish people hadn't kicked the can on it, but they did.
Is this rehab for car accidents or brain injuries?
It's a range of things, but it's for young people, who really can't be at home, and can't be at home, during, full time, and need this kind of care. And again, the caregivers there are amazing.
So they're going to be going someplace else. He's worried they're going to go to the Shattuck Hospital. I guess he's worried about that. Although Shattuck does a lot of good work.
Well, let's have an answer here.
Let's see where the working group comes to on this and what makes sense. What's in the best interest of these kids? That's my focus. That's my job. What is in the best interest of children, right? What's in the best interest of their care and health and well-being, like Patrick's little girl?
Well, speaking of someone who doesn't care at all about care, Ralph Delator, could you, as a you're a lawyer and you were obviously the Attorney General, Malta is the only jurisdiction that has indicted Ralph Delator for what I think you told us a few months ago you thought was a crime, and we surely think are crimes, plural, plus his number 2 over there in Brookline. Do you have any thesis as to why no jurisdiction in the United States has indicted this guy, and he's gone to horse shows with dressage with his
wife?
I
don't. I think it's disgusting. I don't know where things are in the works. I saw that our senators recently sent something to Pam Bondi, asking her to investigate.
Did you work with her?
I did.
What did you think of her?
I served with A.G. Bondi as Attorney General, and we worked well together on a number of things.
She's an election denier.
We actually traveled to Israel together with Janet Mills, actually, with a group of AGs a few years ago. Remember that?
Before you go, we're giving you a gift, by the way. This is a GVH habit.
Is it worth
no,
more
it's
than
under
50 bucks?
$49
$5.
actually. It's incredible.
$5.
Doesn't look
Thank
like
you.
it is.
Before you go, we only have a minute.
Thank you.
What do you think of the Pope?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. As a Catholic, as an American, I think it's a wonderful announcement. I really like that Pope Leo is somebody who, to hear him speak yesterday, I thought it was kind of fun. He's got the little bit of the Chicago accent there.
He does. Actually.
So that's in him. And also, he served for 27 years in Peru. And a Pope who can represent all of the Americas right now, I think it's a beautiful message. And he seems to me to be somebody who's going to carry on the work of Pope Francis, who I had the honor of my lifetime meeting and spending time with.
Oh, I
Was
didn't
that
know
the
that.
environmental thing?
Yes.
That was during the
Oh
environmental
gosh,
thing.
that's right.
Climate,
That's
yeah.
right.
And I think it was a hard day when a couple weeks ago when we woke up to the news that Pope Francis had succumbed and moved on. And it was a really, I think, joyful day yesterday with the announcement. And we should all, in my view, offer Pope Leo our prayers.
Governor Healey, we thank you so much. Enjoy the hat. We'll see you next
Thank
month.
you.
Thank
Great
you
to
very
be
much.
Good luck with
Happy
everything.
Mother's Day to all
Yeah.
out there. Take
Yeah.
care.
Governor, thank you very, very much. We much appreciate you coming in.